Well, here we go. Due to popular demand, I've decided to do another video blog. This one's taking place in Musgrave Park, just outside of West Belfast. I'm really going to talk about maybe two things. One of them is really an update on Palestine. The new Israeli right-wing government that's responsible for the death of the 10 people in Nablus and the 100 people who were shot, 25 of whom were seriously injured, obviously have the gloves off, as if the Israeli Defence Forces ever had the gloves on, and there appears to be a shoot-to-kill policy. Zero tolerance of any Palestinian basically on the streets or on the roofs or looking out of windows in what are basically refugee camps from 1948 and from 1967 that are being brutally assaulted by Israeli security personnel, including undercover operatives dressed as Palestinians, dressed as women, dressed as sheiks, hiding in the mosques, while they claim they are fighting Palestinian resistance groups and individuals. When you remember that the siege and the occupation is illegal, then they've absolutely no right to be there and no right to be going into the camps and arresting Palestinians who have the right under international law to resist the illegal occupation and the settlements by any and all means necessary. So a follow-on from that is that Itamar Ben-Gvir, probably one of the most right-wing elected Israeli politicians in the history of the state. Part of his manifesto when he stood for election was that he would bring in a law basically that would call for the execution of any Palestinians involved in the resistance movement and indeed resisting the illegal Israeli occupation. So as part of that, they have now passed in the Knesset a bill. I don't know how many different layers it has to go through, but it's passed some of the obstacles that were maybe placed in its way before becoming official law, where they are basically stating that anyone who kills a Jewish person or anyone who is involved in an attack upon the Israeli state is liable for execution. So arrested, brought before the courts, sentenced to death and possibly hung. Now, I did a tiny wee bit of research to see whether or not Israel had a, what would you call it, the death penalty in place, and apparently they do. The only person who has ever been convicted in the court, sentenced to death and actually hung was Adolf Eichmann. He was renditioned from a third country in 1960, and he was hung in 1962 as being basically a mass murderer, an architect of the Holocaust. So Palestinians who pick up arms against the state of Israel are now to be considered mass murderers, like the Holocaust guy Adolf Eichmann. So what are we really talking about here? Well, people say Israel is an apartheid state and it has its separate roads for Palestinians and for Zionist Israeli Jews. What it also has is discrimination against the Palestinians who live in historic Palestine, 48 Palestine as it's called, which some people call Israel, which was born in terrorism and blood and a campaign of murder in 1948. So what we have is this law, which is an apartheid law, because what it's saying is if you kill a Jewish citizen of Israel, you will be liable to execution. And if you're involved in a national war of liberation against an illegal occupying military force, you are subject to execution if caught. So that means if you're an illegal settler, and there are over 100,000 of them armed in the West Bank and nearly 800,000 of them in total in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, then the state of Israel is actually saying a settler can go and murder as many Palestinians as he wants because he hasn't killed a Jewish Israeli citizen, because it's not seen as an attack upon the Jewish state, and they will not be liable for execution, being hung, or the death, or given lethal injections, or whatever way this is all going to work out. So it's an apartheid law. It's specifically aimed at Palestinians involved in the resistance. I'm not sure if I have really known of a state that would execute its opponents that are involved in a war of liberation. I could well be wrong about that, actually. I think the death sentence might have been passed in the Republic of Ireland on Republicans who had shot policemen while carrying out fundraising causes like bank robberies. So the apartheid state has now moved so far to the right that they not only murdered 10 civilians, which became 11, as some young man succumbed to his injuries a day or two later, and shot 100 people with live ammunition. Then you have 400 settlers attacking the town of Hawara. The excuse is that Palestinian resistance shot and killed 2 members of the Israeli Defence Force. Now, if you remember, we're talking about 800,000 illegal settlers and something like 219 illegal settlements. 100,000, as I've said, are armed. But I mean, many of these settlers are their families, and they have male members, fathers, sons, brothers. And everyone, as far as I'm aware, who's an Israeli citizen, has to do their national service. So we're talking about 100,000 people in the West Bank who are armed, many of whom are already militarily trained and are potentially in the Israeli Reserve Forces, if they're not active members of the Israeli occupation forces in Palestine. So these people are armed to the teeth, and when 400 to 500 of them attacked the village of Hawara outside of Nablus, they claim in response to the death of these 2 guys. So you murder 11 people in Nablus, you shoot 100, many of them seriously injured. Surely they must expect some form of retaliation, some form of a response from the Palestinian resistance. And they got that response. They had 2 members of the IDF shot and killed in a military operation by the Palestinian resistance groups, which is legal under international law. I have to keep saying that because it's so true, and no one really mentions it on a regular or semi-regular basis. So then the result of that, people talk about an escalation in what's happening there, but for 400 to 500 settlers to attack a Palestinian village that has no armed soldiers to protect it. In fact, these Israeli settlers had protection from the Israeli army. They went in, they murdered 1 man, a 37-year-old. I have read on social media that 2 weeks before this man's death, he was actually in Turkey helping rescue people who were lying under the rubble after the earthquake. So there's a guy, a humanitarian, spending his time helping to save other people. A father murdered by Israeli settlers who were protected by the Israeli army. I don't know the exact statistics, but they were talking about, tens of cars, 30, 40, 50 cars burnt out, many homes burnt out. And people Israelis calling for death to the residents of Hawara. And there was previously an illegal occupation post. This is what they do. Some of these kind of fundamental Zionists go in, see some arable land, see somewhere where they wanna live, and they pick the hilltop and they build an illegal outpost on the hilltop, and then that's protected by the Israeli army, whose designs there are to protect the Israeli Jewish civilians in the West Bank. So they put up an illegal outpost, then they get support from the army, then they get support from the state. Someone runs in electricity after a while, then they run in running water, and then they get planning permission as the next settlement and expand the Israeli Zionist footprint within the occupied West Bank. So these illegal outposts that are eventually become part of the settlement infrastructure in the West Bank, that was abandoned because there were many protests from the local Palestinian villages, and rightly so, saying we don't want any illegal Zionist settlements built on our land, and people had the deeds to the land and the property of the land. It's just theft. It's like the white Europeans did in North America when they went in and just stole the land from the native Indian population and kept dispersing them and making them become refugees further and further and further from the centres of commerce, from the centres of land, agriculture, arable land, put them on the reservations, and basically extinguished the soul in some aspects, along with the culture of the Indian people. They took the kids, they put them in the schools, they taught them the white man's language. They tried to totally change the ethnicity as such and the cultural values of the native communities. So that's what we're seeing in Palestine. A continuation of the Nakba from 1948, when 750,000 Palestinians were forced out under threat of death, basically, from the newly created state of Israel. And then in 1967, when you had the Six-Day War perpetrated by the Israelis, organised by the Israelis for them to steal more land, and indeed occupy both Gaza and the West Bank. What they did then was, I think that's called the Nakba, which was the second exodus, really internal exodus within the West Bank and Gaza of the Palestinian people. So we have people who were made refugees in 1948 living still in refugee camps in both Gaza and the West Bank. And we have refugees who were created in 1967, the Nakba, and these people were forced into refugee camps in both Gaza and the West Bank as their land was stolen and occupied. I mean, literally in 1948, they forced people out of their homes, as I say, 750,000 people, who are entitled under UN Resolution 194, the right to return. They have the right to return to their homes, which is refused by the Israelis, who refuse to abide by international law. And there's another resolution, 3236, which talks about, I think that was 1974 that was brought in, and that talks about the right of Palestinians to fight for self-determination and sovereignty, and also the right of return as enshrined in Resolution 194. So that's basically what I want to say. You know, a lot of people aren't fully aware of the background to what happened in Palestine in 1948. There's something like between 7 to 8 million people now, Palestinians in the diaspora. There are many of them in the adjoining countries of, like, they're in Lebanon, they're in Syria. Where else would they be? In Egypt, because that's right beside Palestine. Or in Jordan, a huge Palestinian ethnic group was forced over the border from the West Bank, over the Allenby Bridge, I assume, into Jordan beside the Dead Sea. So this new power that the Israelis are trying to exert, you couple that with they will delegitimise your citizenship if you're involved in the resistance. So what could be construed as an attack upon the Israeli state? Well, if I was to write an article calling the Israeli state apartheid and racist, which it is, that could be seen by some people living there as an attack upon the Israeli state. A young boy who picks up a brick and throws it at a militarised tank, that is seen as an attack upon the state of Israel, because the tank is part of the Israeli military operational stuff. So then if you throw a bottle or a Molotov cocktail, or you burn tires to obscure their view of someone, which I've seen with my own eyes, just using a slingshot against what has been claimed from time to time to be the fourth largest army in the world. Never mind picking up a gun and resisting as you are entitled to legally. This could get very, 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 very murky. I mean, take away your citizenship, which means that you can be kicked out of the country. They demolish people's homes. They claim that people don't have permits to build their homes. But if the occupation is illegal, then you shouldn't have to ask the occupation for permission to build your home, which they'll refuse because they want Palestinians to leave. And basically this is another step in the final push towards total repression of the Palestinian people, total theft of any land that has water or is arable land that can grow food, or has beautiful scenery, and you can build a lovely settlement overlooking the Galilee or overlooking Jericho. I've been in the West Bank 3 times. I have to say, I've been in Syria 5 times. I have to say that the environment there is stunning. It's such a beautiful place. You can understand why people would claim it's the cradle of civilization and the birth of humanity in Babylon and Iraq and stuff. But I'm not trying to get off subject. I just think it's important that we understand that the illegal continued occupation of the West Bank is only going to get worse when people don't stand up and demand that the state of Israel is dismantled, that the people of Palestine are given sovereignty and equality and are given their dignity and their right to life, and that we should all stand by the resistance axis in the Middle East. That's Iran, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, and more increasingly Iraq. And we must defend the right of Palestinians to use any means necessary, including physical force, to liberate themselves from what the world already agrees is an illegal occupation and has no right to exist. So, thank you, and I hope it's maybe brought a wee bit of clarity to what is a very, very, very horrible ongoing ethnic cleansing and persecution of the Palestinian people.